speaking of conduct and ethics, there have been some recent, complaints about appraisers, not in our area. I haven't seen anything in our area, but I've read articles before in the past couple of years where, there will be a complaint that, hey, for context, well, let me say, so I've read two separate articles that pretty much said the same thing. Here's a black family or an interracial family. They have their home appraised for whatever reason. The appraisal comes back lower than what they were expecting based on what the limited knowledge that they had of the neighbors. Mm-hmm. They get the house appraised again or multiple times. Still same results. Then they remove their pictures from the home, and all of the next appraisal report that they get, it's at a value that they were expecting.
Sure.
Much higher than the ones before. I'll tell you, I can see some possible scenarios. I won't say that. I won't try to absolve anybody of any wrongdoings. Mm-hmm. Bias is out there. Mm-hmm. Prejudice is out there. It's alive and it's real. I could also see some scenarios where, hey, this could have been a not a misunderstanding on the appraiser's part, but a misunderstanding on the buyer's part. Are you familiar with those?
I am.
And what are your thoughts? Without trying to put any blame or anything, what are your thoughts on those situations as far as the information that was in those articles?
Just as you said, there are racist appraisers. Mm-hmm. There are racist waiters. There are racist.
Sure,
I mean, it's alive and well. I think it's slowly getting squished out, but it exists.
It's hard to hide.
Sure,
it's hard to hide. Mm-hmm.
Having said that, and that may very well have been the case in the scenarios that I'm familiar with, but none of the reporting that I've seen in any of the writing identifies. It's like I'm on the inside, so I know what to look for.
Right.
You know what I mean? As far as, okay, could have been this, could have been that, could have been this, and again, it could have been a racist appraiser. Mm-hmm. It very well could have been. But there's just so many things in the reporting that, okay, well, this happened in 2020, and just as we looked at,
right,
things are just shooting
up.
So there could have been a difference between here and now. What I don't ever see is this was done in June, and then they had it reappraised. Did they have it reappraised 2 months, 2 weeks later, 2 months later?
Right.
And it kind of matters.
Sure.
To the degree, to $100,000 degree,
sure.
I don't know about that.
And that's kind of what the amount of money, kind of keeps me on the side of, this may have been somebody's personal bias, whether that be racism or prejudice or whatever that may be. But then at the same time, when I produce a comparative market analysis, I'm trying to put myself in your shoes without as much detail.
Sure.
I know, and I tell several sellers about this. Hey, this house that is most like yours was sold 5.5 months ago, or 5 months ago. We have a small window because and would I be correct in saying that you normally go back about 6 months? Is that I was taught that
during this COVID time, and yes, I mean the more recent, obviously the better. The de facto has been 12 months.
12 months, okay.
Anymore, even if it's not as comparable, it all kind of depends because this is kind of an art and a science all at the same time.
I understand.
But if I can grab something in the neighborhood that's pretty comparable to it from the last 90 days, I really want to put it in there.
Right.
It's probably not going to be, if it's not the most comparable house, it's probably going to be like number 4 or 5. It's not going to be in the top 3, so to speak. But as far as dates go anymore, and that's one of the things that has kind of changed is I'm going to start off at 90 days and slowly work out. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, that's not true. I typically start at that year and go, okay, I've got 13 sales here.
Sure.
Let's see what happens if I bring it within
Right,
6
right,
months.
right.
So it actually goes from a larger to a more narrow view. But yeah, a year, 6 months.
So I could see a scenario where, hey, this very comparable home is no longer. It's not that it's not a viable option to compare, but it falls in a tricky range, or it's a certain distance where there's another house where somebody came in and possibly sold a house for much lower, than you expected, or you would hope for your home, and it would change an appraiser's opinion on value.
And it's difficult because these tend to be in larger cities.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So you may have a subdivision of 200 houses with 5 floor plans. And you can just do the last 90 days, whereas it doesn't work that way here.
Sure.
Right? Because we have very, very, very few of those types of deals.
Right.
So I hadn't even thought about what you're saying, in that, maybe 6 months ago this happened, but then somebody. And I'm trying not to think like Geff. I'm trying to think like somebody else.
Sure.
But it sure seems like any appraiser worth their salt would have said, okay, something's goofy here.
Right.
Or I got this one at 110.
Right.
And this one at 285. Right.
It seems like you'd be able to put that together.
And again, I'm not out to defend them at all. It's just ignorance on my part. I just know enough to be dangerous.
Right.
But I know that you certify in your document that goes to Fannie Mae. You certify that there's no bias. Your client then reviews the appraisal. Then that goes to an underwriter for a secondary market.
Sure.
So, typically Bank X is not actually, unless it's an in-house thing, it gets sold to somebody else.
Right.
So that thing is reviewed 1, 2, 3 times before it gets to Fannie Mae.
Right.
And that's the thing, is that we never hear the result of how did all this end up washing out. We just hear the headline of what occurred.
Right.
Well, how did all this end up washing out?
Right.
I mean, that appraiser
give us some detail.
May have been racist, may have been taken out of business, or that thing may have stood up because there's something that just wasn't reported.
Sure.
It's difficult. It's difficult to know from that. But when this first started coming out, again, that group of fellow appraisers that we go back and forth with, it hit our radar, and we kind of all said the same thing. I don't even know how you could turn in a racist appraiser. I mean, there's just too many layers. Layers that you're just going. You would have to be lying.
Sure.
And maybe they are. I mean, never underestimate hate, right? But it's hard for me to really comment on it so much because it just feels so out of line.
Sure.
And again, not to say that it's not happening and that it hasn't happened. I mean, there's, that thing's an onion. I mean, looking at that type of scenario and predominantly black neighborhoods as a whole onion of where you're like, okay, well, and there's questions about, and I've seen this fairly recently, about leaving the neighborhood and using comparable sales from somewhere else. I'm like, but that's not the same investor.